First of all, thank you for being here, but we want to thank some members of the Moscow Peace Band for their presence with us today. Thank you very much for being here. Also, thank you to Adam Hart Music for donating this sound system today. And thank you to Palouse Proactive, a nonpartisan organization that advocates for positive change and believes in respectful dialogue and respect for civil rights. Yes, Palouse Proactive. Thank you to Community Congregational United Church of Christ, a progressive, justice-seeking faith community. And folks, this is one of 800 vigils that's going on right now, not just nationwide, but worldwide. Probably it's more than that by now. So we are not alone. We're not alone. We believe that every woman, child, and man deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And we call for the cruelty to end. Yes. Human beings seeking help and protection do not belong in cages or in jails where they are harmed and dehumanized. And so this evening we have a couple of speakers. I want to introduce the first speaker is Raul Jimenez. He's a member of the Crimson Group at Washington State University. And the Crimson Group is an activist support group for undocumented students and allies. And Raul, welcome.
All right, so as you mentioned, my name is Raul Jimenez. I am the co-chair for Crimson Group, and I am a student here at WSU. I'm doing a double major here. I wrote it down just so I wouldn't forget what I wanted to say to y'all today, but I want to start off with thanking for everybody to be here. It's Friday. You guys could have been doing anything else at 7 p.m. And you guys chose to be here, stand with us, stand with human rights, make your voices heard, and that's what really counts. So I really appreciate that. All right, so what I wrote down is, so as Crimson Group, we have direct contact with national level advocacy groups and supportive groups. We help and push each other to become the best version of ourselves. We become a family, and this includes allies. The immigration status does not matter. We are all human at the end of the day. One of our goals is to spread awareness of what is going on politically and how we can help each other every single day. This issue of kids dying in inhumane conditions at these camps may seem far from us because we are not directly being affected, but at the end of the day, we have a voice and we can make it heard with motions like today. Being a Latinx, these issues are brought every day into our lives. It is spoken of every day in our households. And to think that if we rewinded 20 years, that could have been me in those camps. If this would have been going on 20 years ago, this would have been me. I would have never been here. I would have never been an advocate leader. I would never be speaking in front of you guys and be making my voice heard. The same is true for the kids there today. In 20 years, or maybe even 5 years, who knows their ages, but maybe even 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, they will be the next leaders to provide with a better future for all of us. Because at the end of the day, the one thing we all seek is pure happiness, and nobody has the right to take that away from anybody.
Raul Jimenez. Thank you, Raul. And God bless you and the Crimson Group at WSU. Yep. I hope that this community reaches out and supports them. They're a wonderful organization, wonderful people. The next speaker is Casey Parsons. Casey is a law student, third-year law student over at the University of Idaho. And Casey also works at the Immigration Legal Clinic, providing pro bono services for immigration issues. Casey, where are you?
Hi, everyone. Like Steve said, I was asked to come say some words on behalf of the law school with respect to the current state of immigration policy and just this amazing gathering this weekend. So the first thing I want to say is that I'm so glad to see so many people here in support of people that are kind of trying to come into this country. I think it's really important that as citizens we come together and recognize when atrocities are being committed against marginalized people. And something I want everyone to remember is the energy that we have here today, because this is not a problem that began in 2016 with Donald Trump, and it's not a problem that will end in 2020 with the next presidential election. The immigration policy and system in the United States has been deeply flawed, broken, and racist for most of our lives and well beyond that. So I think it's so important for us to remember that these kinds of gatherings are incredibly important even after Donald Trump is no longer the president. The second thing I wanted to address really quickly is specifically what's at issue this weekend, because there's been a lot of rhetoric and sort of confusion about some of the statements that have been made by the Department of Homeland Security with respect to the sort of like mass raids and deportations that are happening. I just think it's important to be clear that the people that are at the most risk right now are people who have faced deportation proceedings and already been determined to be removable. So I think that's important to keep in mind, because there's just been a lot of rhetoric about ICE kind of just like randomly going door to door. That's not the case, but I still think it's really important for us to center the people that are the most at risk. And to that end, I think it's important for us also to remember that a lot of us here have the privilege of not facing deportation proceedings or not facing any challenge to our citizenship or immigration status in the United States. And it's important to use that privilege in order to combat these policies, which is another reason why I think it's so important that people are here today. And I think there's two main ways that people can do that. The first is in monitoring any interactions you see between the police or law enforcement agencies like ICE and any people of color, because that's where we know that those abuses are the most likely to occur. And just being there as someone who is witnessing what's happening and making it known that people are observing law enforcement officers in these actions, I think goes a long way in sort of checking that behavior and gives people evidence that they can later use in court when litigating these issues. But also, I think it's important for us to remember that that privilege also applies to social situations and the kind of rhetoric that the people around us use. I think we all have a racist uncle or aunt that we see at Christmas every year, and it's being able to have frank conversations about what's at issue and why these kinds of policies are really wrong and deeply flawed is, I think, one of the most effective ways that we can combat them politically going forward. Something else that I think is helpful is for everyone to sort of be aware of the rights that somebody has when interacting with a law enforcement officer. There are lots of great resources on the internet that explain, like, you shouldn't consent to searches, you should always ask for an attorney, you should always make sure that a warrant is signed by a judge. So being educated about those things is the way that you can be an effective advocate for people in your community. And I also have some little Know Your Rights booklets if anybody is interested, so feel free to grab me after this event. And then finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the services that the clinic provides. Like Steve said, I work in the immigration legal aid clinic over at the University of Idaho. We mostly handle asylum and visa cases, and those are all pro bono. We're kind of in a period of transition right now. So if you know anybody that needs that kind of representation, then I would encourage you to have them call the legal aid clinic like at the end of August or the beginning of September, because that's when we're going to be taking new cases. And something else that we've done in the past is having drop-in legal aid clinic dates where people can come and have their applications looked over or have questions answered. Like I said, we're kind of in a period of transition right now because we're trying to hire a new clinic director, but we should have the dates for when that will be occurring soon. So that's a really good resource for people that are worried about their immigration status. And yeah, other than that, keep up this energy, and thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful day.
Casey Parsons, law students at University of Idaho. Thank you, Casey. Thank you for the wonderful work that you do and that clinic does. It's very important work.
She said, I'm out of town.
So we gathered here today as citizens of this country, dedicated to human rights and the fundamental principle that all people have the right to life, liberty, and dignity. And so we call for an end for forcing refugees into prison camps. Right now, there are over 50,000 people in prison camps, immigration prison camps, including 13,000 children. And so we stand in solidarity and call for an end to this cruelty and inhumane conditions. Last month, the jury stood up and they refused to convict Scott Warren, who was a geologist and a volunteer with a group called No More Deaths in Arizona. Warren was facing up to 20 years in prison because he provided 2 migrants with life-giving water and food and shelter. Warren knew that giving food and water could be a matter of life and death because in that desert, thousands have perished trying to make their way over. In fact, just weeks ago, 7-year-old girl from India, Gurpreet Kaur, died along this very same route that Warren and No More Death have provided food and water just to avoid tragedies like this. And so this trial was part of the zero tolerance policy of this administration, cracking down on those who would dare to provide humanitarian aid. And Amnesty International and other groups have declared that the U.S. Department of Justice should immediately drop all charges against Warren and stop criminalizing humanitarian aid. But just last week, the administration, the Department of Justice, has said that they're going to retry Warren on the charges. We are a nation that has made saving lives a crime. And so this inhumane policy consigns desperate immigrants to death in the desert in the name of deterrence. Now, recently you have seen in the news reports about inhumane conditions at these prison camps for those who are seeking asylum in the United States. And a report that was released by our own Homeland Security, so you know it's a very conservative report, reported there is extreme crowding. For example, in rooms that are designed for about 120 people, they have been packed with over 900 people. And people have been forced to stand on the toilets just to get their heads above so they can get air to breathe. There are reports of no access to showers or clean clothes, lacking basic sanitation needs, inadequate food, being held in these cells for weeks. And so it's important to remember in all of this that those who are seeking asylum at the border are not doing anything illegal. That the ones who are breaking the law are the ones who are abusing the immigrants. They are simply refugees fleeing violence and persecution in their own native countries, and they are fully within both U.S. and international law to present themselves at the border in seeking asylum. And what happens, many men, women, and children are first held in these open-air pens. You probably have seen them. Sometimes they're under overpasses, and they're exposed to the elements, and they're forced to sleep in the dirt. They refer to these as dog pounds. And then after that, they're moved to these other centers called hieleras, which is translated as ice boxes or freezers, where they crank up the air conditioning, and so it's about 55 degrees because the air conditioning is up so high. And all of they're giving are these mylar blankets. You see some of the kids wearing them right now. They're not given other warm clothing, and they're forced to sleep on the cold concrete in these freezers, sometimes up to weeks. And the lights are on 24/7. And in some cases, they are imprisoned here, even the children, for weeks. And if there's toddlers there, there's no baby food. There are no diapers. Many are ill. And there's little or no medical attention. Some even have their medication taken away from them when they enter these facilities. One prematurely born infant and a 17-year-old mother spent over a week in this kind of custody at Border Patrol. The baby, barely a month old, was wrapped in a dirty towel and wore a soiled onesie with no diaper and looked listless. And one lawyer, Hope Fry, said, "I looked at that baby and I said to myself, who does this to a baby?" and she remarked that the infant and the mother should never have been held in a detention center for even 5 minutes. Now, there are many of these sick children who are held in these freezers with respiratory problems, no blankets, some with severe diarrhea, no medical care. And just a few weeks ago, there was a team of lawyer advocates who went into one of these facilities, and it was because of them who drew attention to 4 toddlers who were seriously ill. They finally got the medical examinations and the attention that they needed. Meanwhile, we watched lawyers from the Department of Justice actually argue before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that what it means to be safe and sanitary doesn't necessarily mean that those seeking asylum should be given soap or toothbrushes or a place to sleep other than the cold concrete floor. They actually argued this in court. This is being done in our name. Meanwhile, private corporations like GEO and CoreCivic are making millions of dollars, charging in some cases $750 a day to hold them in these pitiful conditions. And by Homeland Security's own admission, there have been thousands of reports of sexual abuse and assault. And vulnerable families regularly endure taunting and cruelty by the guards. Some of them have been told to, if they wanted a drink, to drink out of the toilet. One worker quit when crying children were told that they couldn't even hug and console each other. 2 months ago in the New York Times, it reported that it might take federal officials at least 2 more years to identify what could be thousands of children taken from the arms of their parents and separated from their families. And the youngest of those was 4 months old. Originally, the number was over 2,700 people separated, children separated, but now inspectors believe the number of children separated from their families may be thousands more than that. And just yesterday, there was a report that there were 18 babies under 2 who were separated from their parents, some for as long as 6 months. Now, it's important for us all to remember and to acknowledge and to understand that detention is not a legal requirement. It is completely unnecessary. DHS has the discretion simply to process and to release asylum seekers. And so we call upon the Border Patrol to release anyone who is not a public safety threat and to stop detaining people in inhumane conditions. These inhumane policies and this cruel treatment of these children and women and men who are desperately seeking safety is an ugly stain on the fabric of this nation, and it will not stand. We must do better. We're all responsible for this. And finally, many of you heard recently the president talking about rounding up and deporting all of the undocumented, millions of undocumented people, as you heard Casey say. And what does this do? But creates fear and terror in these communities. I want you to imagine the kind of stress that they're going through right now, inciting terror and demonizing these vulnerable men, women, and children. And so we need a humane immigration policy and not one that abuses good people. In my religious tradition, it says that you shall love the immigrant, for you were all immigrants. You shall not exploit or oppress the immigrant. Rather, you shall remember that you too were immigrants. But my friends, apparently Apparently, our administration has forgotten. They have forgotten that they were once immigrants. But we will remember. We will remember. Now, since last September, there have been at least, and I say at least because we can only depend upon the reporting of the DHS. There's probably many more. But there were at least 24 people who died in Border Patrol custody. And there were 7 children who died in custody. Now you must understand that in the previous 10 years, there have been no children that have died in Border Patrol and ICE custody. But now we have 7. And some have never even really made it to the border. Oscar Ramirez and his daughter, Valeria, you may have seen pictures in the newspaper. After they were turned away from the Brownsville port of entry, which is illegal, by the way, because when you present yourself for asylum at a port of entry, they must take you. But they've instituted this policy called metering. And so after many times of trying to get across and present himself and his daughter for asylum at the port of entry, they decided in desperation that they were going to swim across the Rio Grande River. And many of you have seen those horrible pictures of them lying on the banks having drowned. And so many don't even make it to the border. But for a moment, we're going to take a moment as I read these names. A moment of silence, a solemn remembrance and determination. A moment of silence after I read each one of these names. This May, a 16-year-old Guatemalan boy, Carlos Gregorio Hernandez Vasquez, died when he got the flu, and he was not hospitalized. A week earlier, a 2.5-year-old boy, Wilmer Ramirez Vasquez, died in custody with pneumonia. Two weeks before that, 16-year-old Juan de Leon Gutierrez died in custody. One-year-old Marie Juarez died from respiratory illness she developed while detained. In December, 7-year-old Jacqueline Carl Magwin died of dehydration and bacterial infection. Eight-year-old Felipe Gomez Alonso died in custody of a flu infection. And before that, 10-year-old girl, Darylyn Val, from El Salvador, died in custody. This sick child was kept apart from her mother for 7 months before she died. And then we pause in silence for all those children and parents who have been separated from each other. And we pause and remember at this moment all of the thousands who are suffering under these conditions, who are sick and suffering. Thank you, my friends. And we shall be determined to change this policy which treats asylum seekers and immigrants as criminals, and their only crime is that they dare come to this nation to beg for mercy. We shall show a different kind of response. We shall change the mind of our administrators and our administration. And so let's go forth from this place determined and unified. So thank you very much for coming this evening. And if you think about it, you might want to light a candle and stick it in your window in solidarity, because there's all these vigils that are happening all over the world, all over the country, which are proclaiming the same thing, that we stand for compassion. And if you want to know something to do, there are some handouts that are being handed out. There's QR codes on there if you want to scan those, and they'll give you some ideas of things, ways that you can get involved. Somebody around here has, that woman over there has phone numbers. If you need the phone number, mine's speed dial on my phone. But if you need the phone number of your representative, you can go ahead and get it from her. Thank you very much. Thank you.